Muscle Beach is closed. Welcome along to another episode of Kianski Car Stories. As you probably guessed, in this episode we are installing lowering springs. These are the ones from Progress Tech. They should provide a mild 1-inch drop, improve the looks, improve the handling, and not really sacrifice ride quality. Before we get going, need to do a little bit of prep work. Start with popping the hood. So the Miata uses a hood prop, as you can see, and it works. It's light, Graham strategy, I get it, but I would prefer having gas struts instead. The car actually has provisions for it already, so go ahead and install that first, and then we'll continue. Okay, here is your kit. You got your gas struts, the lower mounts that go down in the engine bay, and then these upper mounts go where the hood hinges are located. And you also have these ball studs that go into the sockets for the gas struts. First step is removing this blanking plate, which you can probably see, or maybe not because the hood prop's in the way. Go ahead and put in the ball stud facing the engine. All right, and then the upper one goes right there. This one, the stud faces away from the engine. Thicker portion goes up to the hinge on the hood. Before we can lower the hood and check everything out, we need to remove about 1 inch or so off of this firewall seal, because otherwise it'll interfere with the actual gas strut. So there's a little rib right here, and just flush with that is where you're supposed to cut. You can just wiggle it out. There we go. That's how the end of that is. Now that that's taken care of, it's time to remove these strut braces. And they should come straight up. All right, we're all set here. Now let's move to the back and remove some carpet. So here's the trunk situation. See all those plastic little clips? All those need to get removed. There's a little bag for the compressor and the little toolkit that comes out. And then we'll have access to the 2 nuts for the rear shock mounts. So now, after removing the carpet and everything else, I'm gonna remove this. And there is the rear shock tower, so those are 14mm nuts. Before putting the car up on the quick jacks to actually get going with all this, let's go ahead and measure the ride height. I'm gonna guess from there to the bottom of the lip, I get about 14 inches and 3/8. About 14 and a half. Okay, now with the wheel removed, you can see what's going on inside. You have the stock yellow Bilstein shocks and the black springs. So that's what we're going to replace. We'll have to rotate the lower control arm down, and that requires loosening that bolt right there. It's an eccentric bolt, so we'll have to index that to make sure I put it back the way it was to keep my alignment close-ish. Definitely going to have to do an alignment afterwards anyway. So you got one on that side, one on that side, and then for the upper control arm, the 2 bolts will have to come out, and that will allow us to pull this back and take the shock out. The black cable that you see there, that's for the ABS sensor, and I'm going to take that out just so it's not in the way, and I don't want to snag on it and damage it. So just a few brackets to remove. And that's pretty much it for down here. And then up top, of course, we'll have to remove the 3 nuts on the shock mount. Forgot to mention that the sway bar end link also needs to get disconnected from the lower control arm, since we're going to rotate that down. So those are the new adjustable ones I put on, and with the new ride height, they will come in handy. It's almost like I planned it. Starting off with the ABS sensor, 10mm on the back and then 12 for the brackets. Now to take off the three 14mm nuts. Okay, now I'm not going to take off the third one all the way. Still want to keep a couple threads so that when I take the bolt out of the bottom of the shock, this nut will still be holding it up, and then I could just unscrew it easily and then take it out. So it just makes life a little easier. Using my 18-inch breaker bar. That is tight. Here we go. So after I turned the camera off, I decided to tackle the nuts instead of the bolt, and sure enough, I actually made some headway. There's the end link disconnected. Alright, so what I'm doing here is I'm going to use the jack to support the hub and the lower controller arm, and then I can remove the bolts on the upper controller arm and the nut on top of the shock mount. And then the last thing would be the bolt at the bottom of the strut, and that should allow me to lower everything and pull it out. So let's see how that goes. The nut up top. Now it's just the bolt at the bottom. So now, should be able to lower this slowly. Easy does it. And boom. Okay, now that we got the strut assembly out, it's important to note the orientation. So draw a line down the center of the bolt hole all the way up. That stud is supposed to be roughly 30 degrees off from that. So first thing is we're gonna have to compress the spring to take off the strut mount. So your first option, you could use these suicide sticks, or you could use this bad boy. Before reassembling everything, I wanted to show you guys the difference between the two springs. You can see the new one, it has more coils and it's also shorter, and it just kind of looks a little bit nicer. Alright, here we go. There you go. We are now ready to reassemble everything with the new springs. So we start off with our shock here. And you get your bump stop. First, a little bushing here. And you get your spacer. Then your spring. And your Das Boot. Das Boot, that's a good movie. That's the same thing. And I'm not going to be able to assemble everything with the shock mount and the rest of the bushings, but just to explain that. So you have another bushing up here, and it actually has 3 small circles on it, and that matches these 3. It seems symmetric, more or less, but that should dictate how that gets installed. And then you have your washer on top, and then the nut. So you can see on this set of springs here, because of the additional coils and the fact that they're a little bit flatter, it's easier to get them on the jaws in terms of having more surface area for it to compress. So that's nice. All right, so now it is sufficiently compressed, and we're at that point where we can put on everything else. So we got the shock mount here. And double checking, we got the arrow on this side, matching the back side of the shock, and then this side will have to rotate to align with that hole right there. So we'll tighten this all the way, and then we'll still have the ability to clock the studs with that hole down there. Okay, so the coil is also on the perch, and now we just have to align the stud with that hole, because once you loosen the tension, you're not going to be able to rotate anymore. So let's use a laser. All right, now for the fun part. I am still supporting the whole assembly with the jack. The bolts for the lower control arm are still loose, and these bolts for the upper ones are in, which is holding everything up right now. So I'll take those out, move everything back, and then bring in the shock. I will support it first underneath with a bolt, and then raise the whole thing up and aim for those 3 holes up there in the engine bay. By the way, I also, there's a little bracket here for the brake fluid, for the brake line, and so I also remove that from the upper controller arm, just so that doesn't get too much stress on it. Put a bolt through it. Okay, got that in. And alright, so you can see the 3 struts are in. I'm going to use the jack to raise it up a little more. So at this point you're thinking to yourself, well, that went really smoothly. What could go wrong? Forgot to put this in. A little plastic gasket that goes on top, so all that has to come out. Yay. And we're back. That plastic little gasket is back on, and we are good. So before we tighten everything down, it's important that the bushings are under the same load that they would be normally with the wheels on the ground. So we're going to accomplish that by raising the whole corner of the car with the jack all the way until it's off the quick jack, just ever so slightly. So that would be the same as essentially weight on wheels. Kind of hard to see, but here you can see the pinch weld is off of that block. So the weight is completely being supported by the jack. I should clarify, it's not only just tightening them, it is also torquing them. But first you gotta do one before the other. So now I'm going to go ahead and Torque the bolts. Upper control arms, we go to 45 foot-pounds. Also 45 for the bottom of the shock mount. And now we just have the lower control arms, which are 100 foot-pounds. Alright, since we only loosened the bolt and didn't remove it, you can see that it really didn't change as far as the alignment goes. And here it is on the other side. You can see that also didn't really move, so good news there. Whew. Well, welcome to the trunk. So here's what's going on underneath. All we have to do is remove that bolt. There's a captive nut on the other side, so that makes things easy. And then should be able to wiggle it out. So let's go ahead. I forgot to remove the end link for the rear sway bar, so I am supporting the assembly with a jack. And then just pop this off. Okay, so I ended up loosening all 5 of the links on the body side. And now you can see we have some movement. Twist. There we go. So same process for the rear in terms of how this comes apart. One difference is we only have 2 studs on the back as opposed to 3 on the front, and on the rear the studs are aligned with the bolt hole, not the other hole that was used for alignment on the front. Okay, now for the install, just have to wiggle it through here again, put the lower bolt in, and then raise it up with a jack, put the nuts on the strut mount, and then same thing, raise the whole section again, put the weight on the jack, and then tighten down and torque all the bushings. Wait a minute. Why can't I just bring it in through the top? It's easier from the top. Well, here we are. After many hours and a lot of hard work, we are finally done. I think it looks really good right now. It'll probably settle just a little bit more, but I also don't want it to be super low. This is my daily driver. So let's go ahead and measure, see what the drop was so far. 13.5. Now let's go with 14 1/8.